Okay, sport fans, tonight we're bringing something, this is kind of what we're going to start our, called Tank Talks. And this might be the first one we're going to do in a series of about 1 billion different ones, because there's a lot of iterations of this that we can do. But I think for our inaugural Tank Talk tonight, we're going to talk about tank destroyers. Now, Germans had a propensity to want to build tank destroyers because they were very effective against tanks, thus the name tank destroyer. So what we're going to do is talk about maybe the start of the tank destroyers, and then go up through the different iterations and derivatives of that. And as you can see by Adam panning through the ones that we have here in our 32nd scale, these are either 21st century or Forces of Valor models, which these are all fairly old, and they're all fairly, they're very, very detailed models. I think they're lovely. So here we go. I think you want to start out with the Stude III, Adam?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay, here is our Stude III. Now, as you can see on the television screen, or the monitor here, that's a real one. And see how close the models come to them? They're just pretty accurate. Now, this is a later model with a longer barrel, but they made the shorter barrel and the longer barrel all the way along. But they started making Stude IIIs about 1939. And what they were is they got the idea that they could build a tank without the tank. The difference between a tank destroyer and a tank is basically a tank has a rotating turret on the top of it, where the Stude III, where the tank destroyers are basically just a big gun they mount in a tank, and they can reduce the cost, and they can reduce the weight of them and still make them very effective. Now, the initial role of the Stude III was to be infantry support, and the original specification of the German general, I can't remember his name, we can bring it up, but the specification was they didn't want it any higher than a soldier, so the infantry could hide behind it, and it also gave it a low profile, so it was hard to hit with the oncoming artillery. And plus they wanted it so it was inexpensive, so they could build a lot of them, and basically provide support and shield for infantry. So a group of these Stude IIIs would go across the field of battle with the infantry behind them, and they would do their best, the Stude would do their best to take out the enemy positions while the infantry advances upon them. So fortunately for the Germans, the Studes became very, very effective. They were probably, and I read that they were the most efficient, most effective armored vehicle the Germans had in World War II. They built over 10,000 of these. I think the final number was 10,086 of the Stude IIIs. And so that being the case, they were used in every battle, every battlefield, every arena of battle. They were used in North Africa, they were used in Italy, they were used in Normandy, they were used in Poland, and thus becoming the most successful armored vehicle that the Germans produced was the Stude III that we're looking at right now. Like I said, there wasn't very many derivatives of them, but of the Stude III themselves. So we're going to get into those. But they had about a 250 horsepower V12 engine in them, and they would do about 20 miles an hour. But they didn't need them to go fast because they didn't need them to outpace the infantry. So they were fairly slow moving. Now, what happened to these later in the war? A couple of German tank drivers got hold of these things, and the most famous tank driver, tank ace of World War II, was a guy named Michael Wittmann, who ended up getting the the Iron Cross and all these things, and every decoration he could get. He ended up killing over 140 Allied tanks and vehicles. But Michael Vickman actually started out driving a Stug III. In one battle, he took out 15 T-34 76 tanks in one battle, where he would drive his Stug up over a hill, take a shot at a Russian tank, and back down. And by the time he was through with it, he had personally taken out 15 tanks, and then he ended up becoming the most famous German tank ace of World War II. So a lot of great tank drivers started out and had a love for those Stug IIIs, because Germans had a problem with it. They'd always kind of over-engineered tanks, so they were easily interfered with their battle plans because of breakdowns. And when we talk about the Panther tanks and stuff later in this series, you'll find out just how inefficient the Germans were building their tanks that actually worked. But the Stugs worked. They were powered about right. They had a good transmission in them. They weren't so heavy that they put a lot of stress and strain on the body and the drivetrain of these tanks. So anyway.
Yeah, so the Stug III is really the first in what you'll see is a pretty long line. It was so effective at destroying tanks, which they didn't originally plan. They had planned on it being infantry support, but it was so good at just hiding behind hills and then popping up and shooting tanks that it completely changed the war strategy for the Germans.
The tactics that a lot of Germans used, yes.
It was first developed and produced in 1940. So that's where tank destroyers first entered the war, at least as far as the Germans go. Just some random side notes. It had a 7.5 centimeter or 75 millimeter gun. It weighed about 24 tons. Was designed by Alket. Had a crew of 4. Lots of the other tanks had crews of 5, and this one didn't need it because it didn't have a turret. So you had the driver was the main turret guy, because that was it.
Good looking tanks.
All right, I think that's it for the Stug. Are you ready to move on?
Yeah, why don't we move on?
All right, so let's pull up the Martyr I. All right, so the next one we don't have a model of, mostly because we don't believe they've actually made a model, at least not a 21st century of Forces of Valor one. This is a Martyr I. Now, it would be made at the same time as some of the other tank destroyers that we have, but we do not have this particular one. This is built off of a French tank chassis. So that gives you some inkling as to the timeline there. It was after the fall of France. And the whole Martyr series was made as a response to the T-34. When we first covered the Martyr series, we kind of talked about how when the Germans met the T-34, they had many issues. They were not prepared for the T-34. And so the Germans span up a whole...
The Russian T-34.
Yeah, the Russian T-34. So the Germans span up a whole bunch of different tanks. The Martyr I was one of them. All of the Martyr tanks would have the 76 millimeter or 7.6 centimeter gun that they stole from the T-34.
Yeah, the Russians...
That the Germans stole from the Russian T-34. And then in this case, they put it on a French chassis.
What they would do is they would cannibalize the Russian T-34 tanks that they had destroyed on the battlefield, and they'd send the German mechanic crews out and cannibalize and take every part off the Russian T-34 tanks they can. But the primary reason was they take that large 7.6 millimeter Russian gun out of the T-34 tanks and put them in this little Martyr I, which is on a French chassis. When we get to the other ones, we'll talk about the other chassis they had. But this was the first derivative of them scavenging and cannibalizing tanks that they destroyed of their enemies.
Yep.
And utilizing their guns against themselves. They pull their guns out of the Russians, put a Russian gun in, and shoot back at the Russians with their own guns. Okay, Martyr II.
All right, so the Martyr II, this is one where they actually wouldn't use somebody else's tank chassis. This is built off of a Panzer II, which they still had chassis for, but obviously were not confident in their abilities to fight against the Russians, and so they would abandon the Panzer II and replace it with the 76mm gun and do a whole new casemate up top, so that it would make the Martyr II.
So they'd take a functioning Panzer II, take the top of it off, put that Russian 76mm gun in it, then just make it so it doesn't have a turret on it and just become a hunter-killer at this point. Correct. A tank destroyer at this point.
That's right.
Okay. Did they keep the Panzer IIs in production also?
No.
Did they? So they took all the Panzer IIs and converted them over to the Martyr IIs?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay. How many of these did they build? Do you have any idea?
Nope.
All right. And so they'd have the same engine, probably that little 180 horsepower, 6-cylinder engine in them, as the Panzer II had, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, now we get to ones that we have models of again.
Yay!
All right, so that was Martyr I, Martyr II. Now we have Martyr III.
Which is, where's the Martyr III?
Martyr IIIs are funny.
Right here.
We have another, when we talked about the Martyr series, I found this to be the funniest of them all. Here we have a Czechoslovakian, actually this is a, yeah, it was Czechoslovakia, I looked it up. A Czech chassis that they stripped the top off of and slapped a Russian gun on, and it was the Germans that did it.
Yeah.
So this is a multinational tank.
An amalgamation of several different things. So it's a Czechoslovakian chassis with a Russian gun converted over by the Germans.
Converted over by the Germans, yep. One thing you'll notice, and we'll get away from later on, is this still has that open mantlet, or turret, or whatever that's called.
Yeah, the open top,
the
convertible top.
Yeah. They did that for convenience of their retrofitting and mounting the gun, so they wouldn't have to build things specific for the Russian gun, which they didn't produce. So they left it open top. They will go away from that in our next generation, but for the Martyr series, they're all open top.
So they built the Stugs first, and they're building Stugs the whole time they're building these cannibalized,
correct,
smaller versions, using whatever they had from other things.
So this is an early version of the Martyr III. This is a later version of the Martyr III.
So this is a Martyr III, and this is a Martyr IIIM?
Yes. You'll see, for those of you watching, we've got the same road wheels, we've got the same chassis, but obviously our gun sits a lot further back.
See here, the gunner sits on the side, up the side run of the gun, and on the Martyr IIIM, a lot more covered, and then they basically stand in there to shoot the gun, make it more efficient, and also a lot better protection against incoming rifle fire or whatever. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, because they sat so far back, if you were to get shot from the front here and it hit anywhere here, that isn't going anywhere. It's got to go through the entire engine block before it would get to a person.
Yeah.
And if it hit up here, you've still got the armor up here, and they're sitting down in far enough behind the engine block, as you can see here, that they're being protected for the most part, other than maybe they'd have to duck, right?
Now, let me show you. here also. Notice the slope of the pallet here. Right here, that's only about a 10-degree slope. Here they got like almost over 45. It looks like almost a 50 or 60-degree slope. The bullets would ricochet off of these a lot better than this. Obviously, the bullets would go in, just slamming those, and the probability of them doing damage and getting inside the tank and making a mess out of them.
Yeah.
This also had a little bit thicker armor, so this would take it and actually. There's a lot of studies showing just the slope of the pallet here made a lot of difference on how thick armor they had to use. And when they get into some of the bigger tanks, it made all the difference in the world, just the survivability. So you can see the difference in the survivability of this tank. You got almost a straight up in front there, the open cockpit, so they were obviously the drivers and the gunner and the tank commander were a lot more at risk. Over here, you got the sloped here. It's a heavier duty armor. This is a lot better put together. This is a heavier armored here, and then they actually can stand in here and work a lot more efficient and a lot better protected.
Yep.
Plus, if they're getting pot shots at them, they can duck behind that armor and not get their head shot off.
Yeah, one of the other things you'll remember when we were just talking about the Stug, one of the parameters was they wanted to not be taller than somebody standing up. Well, here they're getting a lot closer to that, where here they're exceeding that, right? You've got a whole guy up here on top of the drivetrain, but down here we're sinking a lot lower. Here's a side by side of the Stug.
Yeah, see, the Stug is still lower.
Yeah, the Stug is still lower than either.
Quite a bit.
But in comparison, the guy over here is almost entirely above the height of the Stug, whereas this guy, most of him seated down, he's just kind of sticking up there a little bit. And the Martyr series, it was produced in 1942. That includes the Martyr I, II, and III.
Do you have a number on total numbers that they built for them?
All right, so for the Martyr I, we've got 170 of them were built.
Okay.
So there was, between all the different variants of these guys, there was 1,736 Martyr IIIs produced, and they were produced between 1942 and 45, or that's when they were in service.
So there's quite a few of them made,
Mm-hmm.
but not anywhere near the numbers of the Stug IIIs.
Correct.
So only really about a tenth of the Stug III. Well,
yeah, like an order of magnitude.
15%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, the Stug III were designed from the ground up to be just badass. Where these were
slapped together,
mm-hmm. Cannibalizing conquered vehicles. Okay, now what are we going to look at?
Let's look at the Stug IV.
The Stug IV.
Here we have the Stug IV. And we don't need to spend as much time on the Stug IV as we did the Stug III, because it's largely the same thing. The primary difference about the difference between the Stug IV and Stug III is Stug IV is built on a Panzer IV chassis, whereas the Stug III was built on a Panzer III chassis.
And like we talked about a little earlier, and we found out in one of our other things that the Stug III and the Stug IV were just, or the Panzer III and the Panzer IV were just built simultaneously by different manufacturers.
Right, and the Stug IV was built because they needed somebody who knew they needed to move manufacturers. The Stug III had been so successful, they wanted to keep making that, but the people who were making the Stug III, I think they had been bombed or something. Their facility had been bombed, and so they recruited the people who were making Panzer IVs to start making some Stug IVs.
Yep.
In order to cover their losses.
They were just having some repeatability or backup issues, backup plans.
Right. Yeah, so this is largely just a redundancy of the Stug III on the Panzer IV chassis.
And the Panzer IV and the Panzer III ran basically the same engines and transmissions. They had a 256 horsepower V12 engine in them, a Maybach V12 engine, and they had 5 or 6 I think they had 4 forward speeds and 2 reverse speeds.
There were 1,141 Stug 4s produced.
Versus 10,086 plus another 1,300 of the Stug 3s.
Yep.
So there was still the Stug 3, still the champion of the numbers.
Yep. And the Stug 4 did not replace the Stug 3 in production. It was just kind of a supplemental production while they handled production issues.
They're probably a little bit bigger, a little bit more room inside. They still have the 4.
Yep, 4-man crew.
4-man crew. How much did it weigh comparatively?
The Stug was 24 tons. This is 23 tons actually.
Okay, so the Stug 4 is lighter. Huh? Why is that? I wonder.
By about 0.9 tons.
Yep. So essentially the same though.
Essentially the same thing.
Potatoes on that one. All right, same gun.
Same gun.
The Pack 40 or whatever it is, the 75 millimeter.
Yep.
German gun, versus what the Martyrs had was the 76 millimeter Russian guns in them.
Exactly.
All right, so now we've talked about the Stug 4. Now we're going to get into
some of the big boys.
Some of the big boys. Now, because of the success of the Stug 3s, the Stug 4s, and all the other hunter-killer or tank destroyer type things, they come up with something called the Elephant or Elephants.
Right. That would be what we would call, the U.S. would call them. Originally, they were called the Ferdinands, named after Ferdinand Porsche, who was the one who designed it. But we would call them the Elephant. Because they look like a big old elephant. Look at that. Look at that trunk on that guy.
It's a ugly bugger. So Ferdinand Porsche, he designed a lot of stuff that he was a really good friend of Hitler's, and he designed a lot of stuff. But have you noticed a lot of Ferdinand Porsche stuff made it to the battlefield? Remember, he did his own version of the King Tiger, and they only built a handful of his King Tiger version. Interesting enough about this tank here, or this tank destroyer, is it actually had 2 engines in it.
Yeah.
And it was the first hybrid. It had 2 great big Maybach V12s in them that ran big electric locomotive motors in this to run each of the drive tracks. So this one here, so this shows how far ahead Ferdinand Porsche was. He actually made this a hybrid in our terminology today. He had a petroleum-based or an oil-based engine running electric generators to power electrical motors.
So what you're telling me is it wasn't Toyota with the Prius that was the first hybrid. It was Porsche
with
the Elephant.
Yes, quite a bit of difference there. Yeah. Okay, what was the tonnage on this son of a gun?
65 tons. This is 3 times as heavy as the Stug.
Yep. Oh my gosh, 65 tons, and that was a monster gun in it. What's the armament in that thing?
That is an 88 centimeter, an 8.8 centimeter or 88 millimeter Pack 43.
Okay, so that's the same gun as the King Tiger and the Tiger had in it.
Yes, this will be the same gun that you'll also see later on in the Yog Panther.
In the Yog Panther.
Yes. I don't know if he intended on it, but I see a lot of design cues of this from the Martyr III. You see that turret kind of sitting back, or rather not
like
turret,
this?
but yeah.
This could be its baby.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. It's kind of the same. I didn't see that. I didn't make that before, but it is kind of a...
They definitely look related.
Yep. They look related. Now, just look at the size of the scale. I mean, these Forces of Valor and the Century 21 models, these are both Forces of Valor. They build very accurate models. These things are just awesome as far as scale and everything. So you can really tell just by the size of the drivers and stuff in there just how much bigger. How many tons was this? These were like 15 tons.
Yeah.
light 30,000 pounds. Like that's almost as heavy as my Land Rover. Anyway, that was a joke. Sorry, Land Rover, I didn't mean to make fun of you. But this, like 65 tons versus 70 versus 15 tons. So this is over 4 times heavier than that.
Yep.
How many crew is this? 15 or 18? Or did they have
6?
Did they have a bar in there? And
Yeah.
and a brothel, swimming pool.
Yeah, this was a crew of 6.
Yeah.
We had a driver, a radio operator, commander, gunner, and 2 loaders.
They'd probably need 2 loaders
for that big show.
Yep.
Yep. This is actually the first dedicated Panzerjäger designed from the ground up for that purpose.
As a hunter killer?
As a hunter killer. The Martyrs, we scrapped, the Germans scrapped stuff for. The Stugs, it was originally infantry support, and then they used it for other things. I keep saying we, I'm not a German or a Nazi.
Yeah.
But the Elephant, or Ferdinand, was the first built from the ground up by the Germans tank destroyer.
All right, 65 tons, complicated drivetrain.
Mm-hmm.
How many of these did they build total?
They built 91.
91 of these.
Mm-hmm.
Did they see a lot of action, I guess, building 91? Did they?
They did see a fair amount of action. They actually took part in the Battle of Kursk, and it was reported that they lost 13 of these in that battle, but they killed 320 T-34s.
Good gosh. So out of the 80 or 90 they had in the Battle of Kursk, they took out 300 plus T-34s and only lost 13 of these
lost
things?
13.
So these were really effective then.
Yeah. I think pound for pound, the ratio is better for these than any other tank destroyer. But obviously, in comparison to production numbers, it's minuscule compared to the number of Stugs.
Yes, but that's okay. I apologize to Brother Ferdinand because I was thinking he's being kind of silly, but boy, with those kill ratios, those are pretty cool. Lucky they didn't build more of them. Lucky for the Allies, they didn't build any more of them.
Exactly.
Well, that's impressive. So a 10-to-1 kill ratio.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's pull up the Nash Horn. All right, this is the Nash Horn. It was built at the same time as the Elephant, or Ferdinand. It would use the same gun as the Ferdinand, as well as the Yog Panther.
It's a lot smaller.
It's a lot smaller.
Based on
as well as tonnage. It's only 24 tons, so it's the same amount of tonnage as the Stude III. It was built at the same time as the Elephant, which was 3 times heavier.
Looks like it's on a Panzer IV chassis with the 8 road wheels.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Panzer IV chassis. That's a good looking tank. How come nobody makes a model of that one?
I don't know. But yeah, it would have that same 88 centimeter Pak 43. It would have a crew of 5 instead of 6.
Tell us about the Nashhorn, Adam.
Yep, Nashhorn 494 were built. It was designed in 43, I believe.
I love the next tank we're going to do in the series, or next hunter killer that we're going to do, or tank destroyer in the next series we're going to do, is the Yog Panther. The Yog Panthers are kind of a quintessential hunter killer or tank destroyer that the Germans made. It was based upon the Panther chassis, which is a larger chassis in their first generation of the newer tanks that when Hitler decided they needed to catch up with the Germans, he developed the Russians, excuse me.
It was originally built in 1944.
So it's a later model.
Later model. We've tried to go in chronological order here. There may be some mix-up with where the Stude IV fits in, but I think largely we've got the chronological order right so far. 413 Yog Panthers were built. It weighed 45 tons, so less than the Elephant.
20 tons less than the Elephant.
20 tons less than the Elephant, but still 20 tons more than the Stug.
Yes.
As well as the Nash Horn.
The Nash Horn?
Yep. Had a crew of 5. It would have that same 88 millimeter or 8.5 centimeter Pak 43.
They liked that gun, didn't they?
Yep.
That was a mean gun, though.
Yeah, they won't move to a bigger gun until we get to the next one.
Yes.
But this was the last one built with that 88 millimeter Pak 43.
Okay, it had a 600 horsepower Maybach V12 engine in it. It would do about 25 knots or 32 knots or 25 miles an hour, and had a range of 100 miles or 150 kilometers. So it saw quite a bit of service up in the Normandy area and on the Eastern Front towards the end of the war. Like I said, it was a late comer to the war, kind of like the Tiger II. They didn't show up till 1944, but they used these quite effectively for only having 400 of them. The survival rate was very high. The kill ratio was also pretty good. They were effective hiding. They kind of perfected the shoot and move movement, where they get in a line of trees with the camouflage. Their range was up to 3,000 yards or 3,000 meters compared to 1,500 meters of the Allied tanks, or even 1,000 on some of the Shermans. So they could actually destroy another tank twice as far away, and they had superior optics, and so they could destroy tanks, and they wouldn't even know, the Allied tanks that they'd hit wouldn't even know what hit them, because they'd be so far away from them they couldn't see where the shot was coming from. And of course, the ammunition traveling at supersonic speeds would hit the tank several seconds before they'd ever hear the report of the gun. So like all the other hunter killer or tank destroyers, is a very effective tank. I just want to say, when I started doing RC tanks a while ago, the first one I bought from was a Hang Long Yog Panther, and I love it. I still have it, and it's been a great tank and a great RC tank, and it's been a stalwart in my arsenal.
Yeah, and one of my favorite videos we've done on our YouTube channel is of driving the Yog Panther around.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, we ought to put that in a link somewhere. Mm-hmm. All right, now, not last, but almost last, we come up with the mother of all tank destroyers. Let's see, we can't pull that up.
This is the Yog Tiger, built on the King Tiger chassis. This thing is a beast. Here's a real-life photo of a Yog Tiger right up next to a Yog Panther. This was the largest tank armament mobility vehicle built by the Germans in World War II. This thing was massive. It also had a crew of 6, and it weighed 71.7 tons.
How much?
71.7 tons.
So 72 tons. That's how many pounds? Jeez, it's
158,000 pounds.
Wow. A crew of 6. Okay.
6.
Now you mentioned that this would have a bigger gun on it.
Yeah, so this is a 12.8 centimeter or 128 millimeter Pak 44.
Wow, so it's almost twice as big as gun.
Almost twice as big, yeah.
Is the Pak 88 then?
About 1.5 times as big.
Yep. Wow. Now, I think, how many of these do they build? I heard a lot of rumors about these things.
There was between 70 and 88 built.
Yeah. Now, they had quite a bit of mechanical problem. They put the King Tiger, the Yog Tiger, any of these bigger tanks had a lot of drivetrain problems. The engines weren't big enough to quite run them. They'd always break in the transmissions. Because can you imagine pushing 72 tons with that standard insane. 650 or 700 horsepower Maybach engine? So they didn't have a real good service record as far as being durability and usage. But I think when they did get in battles, they did pretty good, didn't they? Kind of a cool looking tank, but this is the last one they built, isn't it? So they did between 80 and 90 of these. They were pretty effective. I remember there's one story where one of these was coming down a road against a couple of tigers, and the tigers said, "Yeah," and they shot it and they killed it and blew it up. Took several rounds, but the commanders of the Tiger tanks had never seen one before, and they had heard rumors of
you mean a Sherman? Or
no,
you're saying Tiger. What?
Tiger tanks.
Why
German. They didn't know what it was. The Tiger tank commanders. This was coming down the road at night. They didn't know what it was, and so they shot it. And the 3 or 4 Tiger tanks, they hit it 4 or 5 times and knocked it out, killed everybody on board of it. And they didn't know it was a German tank because they had never seen one before. And they had heard rumors of the new Pershing tank coming out. They didn't know what it was.
Right.
They never saw this. It was at night. They didn't see the markings. And so one of the first Yog Tigers that saw service was killed by friendly fire.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure that made commanders mad.
Yeah, can you imagine being the commanding officer? Well, we didn't know what it was, But anyway, that was not funny, but a true story.
Yeah, this has a 600 horsepower Maybach V12 engine, so similar to earlier V12 Maybach engines, but now we're getting 600 horsepower out of it instead of the 400 we often get in earlier tanks.
Yeah, when they got up into the Panthers mode, they were 500-600 horse, and then when they went to the King Tiger, they got up to the 650 and over 600 horsepower. But they still hadn't improved the drive lanes that much. This was a lot of tank to move for 600 horsepower, and they're weak drivetrains that they put in these tanks. Okay, the next tank we're doing is a Hetzer tank, and this was a real surprise to me. Knowing that they build them at the same time as the Yog Tiger, this is a late comer to the ball game. They didn't even start it till 1944, so it's tiny compared to.
This is 15 tons.
15 tons.
So now we're back to the same size as our Martyrs. It's on the same chassis, so that makes sense.
It's on a 38T.
38T chassis.
Yeah.
So now we're back to.
So 5 years later, the 38T chassis is still around.
38T chassis still around. The Czech chassis.
The Czech
built
chassis.
Before Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic. I don't know the state of Czech before.
They started building them before the Germans invaded them.
Yeah, they started building them before the Germans invaded, but they didn't serve in the Czech army before the Germans invaded. So the Germans were the only ones to use them. But that chassis would last the entire war.
They built 2,827 of these things. So they were
quite abundant.
Yeah. What did you say earlier when we got talking? This is a kind of a scrap heap one they built.
Yeah, this is a scrap heap. They at the very end of the war, they needed something that was reliable because here we have this Yog Tiger,
which is going away right now.
They only built 100 of them, and that's because they could only build 100 of them because they were so big and heavy,
80 and 90 of them, yeah.
And so they were running out of supplies.
And the raw materials it take to build one of those Yog Tigers, or even a Yog Panther.
71 tons of anything is a ton of.
It's a ton. Yeah, it's tons.
It's a ton of a ton.
Yeah.
Of stuff, but this, but because this design. Originally spawned by that Stude III was so successful, they decided to make a Hetzer. And you'll notice between this and the Martyrs, which Doug's pulling up right now, we finally have a closed top Panzer 38T variant.
Yep.
These open tops are finally closed. Finally able to put...
Notice it's got the same road wheels, the same, you know, it's the same size, it's the same chassis, but it's looks like a really armored little turtle or a bug there.
And it would have, if you'll remember, we were talking about this, these have the 7.6 millimeter, or sorry, 7.6 centimeter, 76 millimeter guns, Russian guns. This has a 7.5 millimeter Pak 39.
Okay.
Which is the same size as the Stug, I believe.
Yep.
Stug 3.
So they put the same gun as a Stug 3. They're using the 38T chassis. They're enclosing it. And I think the survivability of these, if I recall, was pretty darn high.
Yeah,
I mean, they were pretty badass little.
And within a year, because they started production in the 4th of March, 1944, by the 11th of May, 1945 is when they stopped production, and in that time they made almost 3,000 of them.
Almost 3,000, 2,800 of them in 1 year. So they were prolific towards the end of the war.
Mm-hmm.
See, they should have stuck with tanks this size all along, you know.
Yeah, I can understand why they want to go to the 88 millimeter gun when they're going up against like the T-34-86.
Yeah,
but
the KV-1 and the
KV-1,
IS-2. Yeah, I understand that.
But having something that's quick, that's fast, that can get in and get out and hide, and
they probably do pretty good against a Sherman.
Yeah,
a stock Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
Not a jumbo, but a stock Sherman. I mean, you know, they would. I think it's a cool looking little tank. All right, now we got a picture of a Hetzer up. Kind of a fun, I don't want to say fun little tank, but...
I mean, comparatively.
Yeah.
Comparatively, it is a little fun little guy.
Yeah. Do 42 miles an hour, 42 kilometers
per hour, 26 miles an hour.
So it's a little bit on the faster side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is funny is in modern day, with the electric vehicles that are coming out, we talk about range anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? But can you imagine range anxiety when you can only go 100 miles in a tank, and if you run out of gas,
you're dead.
You're dead.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not just on the side of a road waiting for someone to charge you, you know.
Yeah.
Or...
Well, you know, I found out doing all these studies on these tanks, you know, I found out that more Russian tanks were destroyed by mechanics or running out of gas than by the Allied forces. I think we've had a pretty fun time tonight. All right, but they built nearly 3,000 of them. And here we are, we're introducing, not in chronological order this time, we're just kind of putting them up, to, you know, to see how they are. All right. Well, anything else, my friend?
Nope. One of my favorite things, one of the reasons I really like that we did this video, is in all of these like war games or whatever, my favorite thing to look at is the design tree. They started with this tank, went to this tank, went to this tank, went to this tank.
You can really see it in this.
Yeah, I really love that we have enough models that we can go through and really see the design tree of
the development
of the tank destroyer.
Yeah. Start out with something like this.
Yep.
And end up with something like that.
Yep. Almost full circle.
Yeah, almost a full circle.
It was very poetic.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Over and out. Thank you. Subscribe, damn it. Bye.